The following episode was originally recorded for a private podcast as part of the Equipped for Life course. It has been edited for public release, but may reference training material from the Equipped for Life course.
So today we're going to try something we haven't tried before. The reason I wanted to try this right now, before Tim and I get too familiar with each other when we're dialoguing in practice.
We're going to practice so much.
Yes. We're going to be working on so much material together that I think a certain thing is going to happen where we become overly familiar with how the other person thinks. And I want...
I can attest to that.
Yes. I want practice dialogues to be as natural and unrobotic as possible. And so we're going to try today to kind of play pro-life person, pro-choice person. Tim's going to be pro-life for this session. And I'm going to be the pro-choice girl. And Josh is going to be here as a listener to observe and help us during the debrief comment section.
Yeah, I'm going to turn my mic off and just let you guys go at it. And then after you guys decide, all right, let's stop this particular dialogue, I'll turn my mic back on. Let's all have kind of a post-discussion, do some commentary, ask some questions. So just talk a little bit about what you were talking about before we started recording, where like, Rachel, are you playing the expert pro-choice girl? Or are you playing what's kind of your role that you're generally taking on here? And is Tim playing basically just himself or a different version of himself?
Sure. So pro-choice Rachel has dissociative identity disorder. She comes in many forms, facets, and identities. So today I am playing the most typical basic girl pro-choice Rachel, because I think there are some forms of pro-choice Rachel that are like super confusing for someone who's not super familiar and mastered outreach. I think Tim could take that pro-choice Rachel, but I don't know how helpful it would be for someone listening.
I think some of our listeners right now are like, I want to hear that pro-choice Rachel. So at some point, we should maybe do that.
Maybe. But also...
This is intended as more helpful and practical. Here's a picture of what outreach
Exactly. I want this to be helpful to someone who's maybe never done outreach before and doesn't have any idea what to expect.
It's so hard to pull that off with people who work together too much. Like we experienced this at Justice for All. That team, we worked together so much and did so much outreach together. Like doing a fake role play, it's really hard to pull that off and have it actually resemble outreach conversations.
It's even pretty difficult with people who you don't know that well. Yeah. And so to have it be as helpful as possible, Tim will be playing
I want to play myself.
You're gonna play yourself?
Yeah, so you're so disappointed.
It's not a level playing field if you play yourself. Well, I don't think any pro-choice person stands a chance.
Yeah, but in terms of thinking about what's going to be helpful to listen to, I don't think being like, all right, I'm going to get in the shoes of a pro-life person with like half my IQ or experience, and just like not try like you making the most helpful response. I don't think that's helpful.
Sure.
And also, in terms of being natural, it's, I think, harder to be natural on the pro-life side. That might not be true, but at least it feels like it'd be hard for me to be natural if I'm pretending to be like someone else playing the pro-life side.
I'm convinced.
Just be myself.
I'm convinced I want to play with Tim, like actual Tim.
All right, I'm turning my mic off. How are we starting?
So let's here's how I do it with my Students for Life group. We're going to pretend that you are at an outreach table, some sort of polling table that has a question that says, should abortion remain legal? And I'm a passerby.
Hey, would you like to sign our poll?
What is this?
We're doing an informal poll. We're trying to figure out what people think about abortion. What do you think about abortion?
Oh, that's kind of cool. Okay, let me go write something down.
Great. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. Hey, thanks for participating in our poll. Do you mind if I ask you what you said? Like I could go over there and awkwardly read what you wrote, but I'd rather just ask you because you're a person.
Sure. I think that abortion should be legal. I don't think we should be telling women what they can and can't do.
Could you expand on that? I think I've heard a lot of different people say that kind of brief phrase. But I'd like to understand better what you mean. You think it should be legal. We shouldn't tell women what they can and can't do. In what kinds of situations do you think abortion should be legal?
Sure. So I think that every pregnant woman's situation is different, and I don't know enough about that situation to judge her actions. And so it would make me feel weird for us to have like a law that's just blanketed for that.
I think that's pretty sensible. Like when you have the kind of situation like what we have with complicated pregnancy situations in our country today, it's hard to make a really broad policy about all of these situations because you don't want to have like a blanket general thing that's going to then have people being left out in the cold and being in really bad situations. So I think that's pretty sensible. Can I ask you kind of a weird question?
Sure.
So let's imagine for a minute that we transport ourselves into a totally different society, and this is a society where abortion technology just doesn't exist. Like no one's developed it, no one's even thought of it, and so because of that, we're in this weird spot where people are in a lot of different like complicated situations, like really complicated interpersonal situations. We've got people who they're getting pregnant and they're not married to the father, or maybe the father's even like a really bad person. So like they don't want to be involved in that. We've got people that are really, really poor, really like complicated situations. Maybe there's a woman who's about to give birth to her child, and she knows, man, taking care of this child, I'm gonna have to drop out of college. So here's the weird question, just like bear with me.
Sure.
Should we decide that it's a good idea for our society to just not have a blanket policy against drowning newborns, because some of these situations are really complicated, and we don't want to like have the kind of policy where like we're going to have people get in bad situations, and just like kind of let them decide.
I don't want that. Like that would be really bad. I think that'd be awful, actually.
I think it'd be terrible. I think you're right. So let me explain why I asked that weird question.
Okay.
So like bear with me just for a second here.
Okay.
And I'm doing like weird alternative universe stuff, but I think the point is pretty straightforward. I have this really weird view. My view is that a human embryo from fertilization. So like I'd pull out my brochure, like this embryo right here, in this picture that I'm pointing at. I think this embryo is exactly as valuable as like has the same moral status as this human toddler. That might sound crazy. Just bear with me for a second. I think that if I'm right about that weird view, then any argument to justify killing the zygote, or an argument for having government policy that allows for the killing of zygotes would have to also be valid for killing the toddler, or for being good policy, like having a broad policy that allows for the killing of toddlers. And so given that, even though like you're right on the money about what you said, that we have people that are in really complicated situations, it's stupid to pretend that you understand everything that everyone else is going through, right?
Yeah, but
okay. but given, even though that's the case, it seems like killing newborns is so bad that we should have a blanket policy against killing newborns, even though people's situations are complicated. So my view is that if I'm right about my weird view that they're morally equal, then we should have a policy against it, even though people's situations are complicated. What do you think?
I mean, I think that you are kind of wrong with this view. Definitely. I just don't know why I disagree with it.
Help me understand, like with which view?
With like the fact that like something as early as a zygote, like one cell could be the same as like the toddler. I don't think that they're the same, and I can't really like put my finger on why. But also it feels like if that would be true, then we'd be like outlawing a lot of abortions, or like all abortions, and that isn't okay for me.
Okay, so that's really important. There's multiple things there. So I want to try to clarify something. And I lost my train of thought there for a second. The first thing you said was about how they're not the same. I just want to clarify. I don't think that they're like the same in every way. Like I think it's really understandable to look at like these two pictures and think these are not the same. Like one of these things is not like the other, right?
Right.
And like I think that's reasonable. My view is that the thing that they like in terms of moral status, I think they're the same. So they're the same in this quality, in the same way that like I'm not the same as a 2-year-old. Like we're really different, but I think in terms of moral status, we're the same. So I just want to be clear about that. And I think your reasoning is on the money, that if I'm right about that view, then that would mean outlawing pretty much all abortions. Because if I'm right about my weird view, then any justification for an abortion would have to also be a good justification for killing like a born toddler. And it's really hard to think of a situation where it's justified to kill a born toddler.
Right. I agree with that. But I just think that, like, if you're having an abortion that's like that early, like all that first trimester, or I guess I don't know when embryos begin to feel pain, but I don't think like a zygote has that capacity. Like a zygote doesn't even have a brain yet, so how could it feel pain? It just seems a lot different if you were gonna have an abortion there than like with the toddler, because that would be like a really big deal for me.
So I think what you're saying is totally fair, because certainly at the zygote stage, it doesn't have a brain and it can't feel pain. When exactly it can feel pain, like I've heard contradictory sources on. I think 20 weeks is a pretty good mark to aim for there. I think 20 weeks it can feel pain. And so I think because of that, it's kind of like there's a different thing going on when you kill a zygote as when you kill a newborn. Even assuming that they're both like they're morally the same, the fact that one can feel pain and could have an awareness of what's going on, that is different than the other one. But do you think that that means it's okay to kill the zygote, the fact that it can't feel it or be aware of it?
I mean, yeah, like there's a lot going on there. You know, the zygote can't feel pain, but it's also inside the woman's body, so that's a lot different too. And like, I really don't want to see us have the government involved in that. It seems really intimate.
You're right about both, like two or three things at once there, and that's challenging because like I only have one mouth. So like help me track with like how to like keep this conversation clear. I want to respond to what you care about and what's helpful to you, but it's easier to raise a difficult question than it is to respond to a difficult question.
Okay, sorry. I want to talk to you. On track I like this. I want to talk to you.
Me too. So like, let me just like, I'm going to pretend that you didn't say anything. Just like, I don't know anything that you just said. And like, help me with like a direction to go that would be helpful in terms of like what you care about the most.
I think it really comes down to, for me, like trusting women enough. Like how much do we trust women? I don't think like we should stop. I mean, I think we should stop women if they're trying to kill an infant, like in the first thing you brought up with that alien stuff or whatever. But like, it feels different to me with abortion. I feel like this is like a really like close, intimate thing for women to have to decide, and it's really tough. So even though I, think that it makes me feel uncomfortable, I don't want to step in. I don't feel strongly enough to step in or something.
I think that's really understandable. And I think I don't understand exactly what your view is, but I really, really want to. And I think a lot is going to come down to this point. So maybe this would be helpful. Could you help me understand why you think we should step in, why we shouldn't just trust women when it's a newborn?
Because it's wrong.
So
it seems really wrong, obviously.
Please hear me. Yeah. I'm not making fun of you.
Sure.
You don't trust women enough? Like, women are in difficult circumstances, and they've got really different scenarios going on here, and who knows what kind of pressure they might be under. You're going to like go into their home and tell them like what to do, and you're not going to trust them, and I don't trust you. I'm going to make the government decide for you that you can't do what you need to do in terms of whether or not to drown the toddler or the newborn. Like, why would you not trust women more?
I guess I don't know how to respond to that. Like,
I'm not trying to trap you.
Right.
I'm
I don't
feel
trapped. I just feel stuck. Not like you're backing me in the corner or anything, but I just feel like I'm having trouble saying what I'm thinking. And like with abortion, it feels like more of a woman's choice to me than with the drowning an infant thing. I don't really know why.
Could I maybe try to help you figure out why? Like, yeah. Like I think you have some different options here.
Okay.
So I think the one option is to say something like, we need to trust women more. Like, I think that's not going to get you to a defensible pro-choice view. That's not intended as mocking or something. I just think that's a line of logic that's not going to work.
Okay.
Because it doesn't work in terms of why it should be illegal to kill newborns. We shouldn't just trust women more if the fetus is a valuable human person. And so I think what you need to do is you need to identify what's different about the case of a parent killing their newborn and like a woman having an abortion. Like there has to be something that's really different about those scenarios. So like one example of what's really, really different is in one case we have this born child that looks like this, and in one case we have this 1 or 2 celled zygote. Of course, in surgical abortions, it'd be a little later on than that.
Yeah, and
but they're different. So
yeah, that came to mind for me, but I know that that's not like a good argument because like what it looks like. I know that's not good. I thought about that.
I'm really glad that you said that because I've actually had a surprising number of people like not understand what you're just understanding intuitively. Like, hey, if it looks different, then that's okay, and that's not a road that I want to go.
Yeah, I don't want to go.
My ugly friends are valuable, just as valuable as me, and so certainly we don't want to go that road. But I think there's a different direction you can go here. Like, it's not just what it looks like. It could be that there is actually a difference that matters, because like being ugly or pretty, it doesn't matter in terms of our value, right? But it could be that that there's actually a difference that matters. So I think that's one road you can go here, and I could try to help you develop that. Although I do think that all of those pro-choice directions will be unsuccessful. I don't think there's a good ultimately pro-choice argument on that side. But I think that's a better road to go than saying trust women, right?
Okay.
Because that could explain why, in the case of the newborn, it's different. I think the other direction they should go, which I think might actually be more interesting to you, is like another big difference between these two scenarios is that in one case you have a child that's outside of the woman's body, that's not connected to her bodily at any level. It's still kind of dependent in a certain way, but it's not like physically on her. Whereas with the fetus, it's like physically inside her body, and like it's a bodily autonomy kind of an issue. There's something you said earlier that made me think maybe that'd be more like what's bothering you, like that's the thing that's different. I'm not sure. Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I definitely think because it's inside her body, she should have more of a choice. Like, it makes more sense for her to be the one making the decision, where it doesn't make as much sense to me with the infant.
Yeah.
I think that's a good stopping point.
All right, so we can stop there.
That was fun.
Thoughts?
Okay, so I feel like I want to show my hand. Like I almost feel like I was playing poker, and I want to see if you know where I was going with that or not.
So it sounded like you were a bodily rights person to me, but I was still asking questions. So I'm not sure.
I was trying to help listeners understand that sometimes the person you're talking with hasn't thought through their view in a way which is super clear to you. A lot of times in the course, when you're going through the modules, I think it could feel like we're going to move from this topic, and then we're going to move to that topic. If they bring up bodily rights, I'm going to talk about that. But sometimes when you're asking clarification questions, it's a little bit more complex because they're not super clear on what they think.
Yeah.
So I was trying to be a typical person who's a little less clear. I think that's a challenge.
I think that explains why we spent as much time as we did in kind of the trot of the toddler territory. And I think that was fairly representative of what I experience on campus a lot of the time is like you go through it once, and if the logic clicks perfectly, okay, well, that kind of argument isn't going to work anymore. But it doesn't click perfectly immediately for many pro-choice people.
One of the things that I liked about what you did, Tim, was and I know we're going to be talking about this in a future podcast, but you're trying to bring in humor when you could, like you're being, but you were being relaxed, and that was obvious. And sometimes you being relaxed isn't necessarily funny, but you're being like kind of charming or something like that. But you brought in humor a few times, like I think intentionally. And I wanted to ask you about one joke you did because I want to know because there's a couple different and potential intentions you might have, but like you're going for different kinds of jokes, and I'm just interested in which one it is. When you made the joke about, you said my ugly friends have just as many rights as me. Are you going for a self-deprecating joke thing where?
No, I'm trying to imply that I'm really good looking, and it's funny because I'm saying that I'm really good looking.
Right.
That's what I was going for.
So I think that's the same thing as kind of what I mean by a self-deprecating joke. Because is there a pretext for you that's part of what's making funny is where like you're not male model level whatever, and you're sort of acting like you are.
I think I'm like actually like a 5 with a good personality. I think that's me.
Right. And that's part of the joke.
That's part of the joke.
Okay. Yeah. I think that's what makes it kind of funny. Or it's one of the things that makes it funny.
That was intentional.
It's one of the things. I think like there's multiple levels of that joke, and I think that's really helping. I was just wondering if that's like something you're doing on purpose.
Yes.
So it seems like I couldn't use that joke, is what you're saying.
You did a similar thing at Outrage, right?
Yeah.
Because you did this thing where you were calling me ugly.
Yeah.
Was there something?
And that I was just this beautiful person.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that was intentional. I've done that kind of thing before.
Yeah. I think self-deprecating humor is really funny.
Actually, the joke you made that I liked the most was something about not having multiple mouths. That was great because on one hand I thought it was funny, on the other hand it helped me to understand why you needed more clarification, why I needed to streamline my view more. That was really helpful and funny.
Cool. I think like my own kind of reflection on like my own performance there is I'm conscious of like how different this is to Outreach still.
Yeah.
So like I was speaking like too quickly. And I'm expecting when I go back and edit this podcast, I'm going to be like frustrated listening to it because I don't speak that quickly at Outreach.
This is the problem that Rebecca and I were having when we were trying to figure out our role play for the conference. Was we had this thing where it felt like kept on feeling too quick.
And so like there's something that's I think it's just a lack on my part of my ability to do the performing acting thing. I've got a microphone in front of me and I've got the big headphones on and like we're recording this podcast thing, and Rachel's like across the table from me, way farther away than an actual conversation. We can't interact at the same level. We don't even, like I can't even see her whole face right now because there's a big microphone in her face. It's still really, really different.
Yeah.
Also, this isn't intended as like critical.
That's fine.
But there were a lot of points where like I would say something like this seems like this is the case, right? And you're like not giving me anything. Like there's no audible things happening from you, which makes it sound like feel more like I'm just like talking at you the whole time.
You can't make it too easy for you.
So there's something going on in my head when that happens. So it's a struggle because on one hand, I already know where you're going with it.
Yes.
On the other hand, like, so that's real pro-life Rachel, but pro-choice Rachel does not know where you're going with it, and I'm trying to get it to be a medium level of challenge or whatever you want to call it. And so I think the typical pro-choice person would have responded at the same rate I did. I tried to. So I was pausing longer than I needed to, if you will. But at the same time, I realize the medium we're talking through right now is audio, and people are listening. So I'm not going to pause way more than would be necessary, I guess. I think that's a waste of time.
I'm saying when I dialogue, it's more interactive. It's more back and forth than I think that sounded. The other critique that I would give to myself is I think the way that I trotted out a toddler initially was a little bit convoluted. I think it's actually a good parallel, but I think it was too convoluted, and so I would want to redo that differently. But what I was trying to do was, as much as possible, just kind of like go with the flow and like trust my instincts. And when I trust my instincts, then sometimes things work really well and sometimes they don't. And I think that's more on the I would do that differently next time.
I only had one note, and it's a question for you. It's a clarification question. So don't read this as me like necessarily critiquing what you did, but either you did something different than the way I do it. You and I haven't had that many opportunities to like listen to each other at Outreach. You know, we're usually talking to different people at the same time. So either you actually do something different than I do, and if that's the case, I'm interested in why. Yeah. Or maybe it's kind of like you did something in this recording environment that's not what you usually do, and in that case, I'd be interested in knowing. When you were doing the trot of the toddler thing, and when you kind of began to describe the logic step, you said, I have this really strange view. And like you emphasized really, and then went on to describe what that view was. Whereas like when I do this, I intentionally say something like, I have this view that's probably going to sound strange to you. Like, but I don't actually think the view that like the unborn are equal is that strange, but it's going to seem really strange to them. Whereas you kind of emphasize like this implication, like the view is actually really strange. Is that something that you did on purpose and what you do because it's like maybe more common groundy, or just talk to me a little bit about that?
Sure. I think that's a great question. So first off, the way that I do the describe the logic step is probably different in every single conversation. So like I am not a
This makes me want to make
person.
Tim do like 8 versions, like just go like back to back. Let's just do a bunch of them.
It would be different every time. And so part of it's that. Part of it is I think there is an actual strange thing about the view. It is actually, I think, not intuitive to look at a 2-cell zygote and say, this is morally equal to a toddler. I believe that's the case because I think the moral logic is really, really strong here.
Yeah.
I believe that by argument. I don't think that's an intuitive leap by a non-philosopher who hasn't thought about it much or doesn't have a pro-life upbringing or something. That's a non-intuitive conclusion.
I totally agree with that.
So
that's what I'm referring to.
So when you said what you mean is like non-intuitive, not like the view is actually like a weird thing.
It is by far the most reasonable view.
Right, but it's non-intuitive.
Yes.
That totally makes sense to me. I totally agree.
So I think that caused my pro-choice character to think, when you were emphasizing how strange it was, to interpret that as being more extreme. And so that's why I wanted to ask you, well, are you like trying to make a case against all abortions, or like at least a lot of them?
Interesting.
I usually don't have that intuition to ask that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think I'm bothered by that exactly, but I think that's interesting.
It just cued me more to like where you were on the spectrum from pro-life to pro-choice, I think.
I think that's probably not a good thing. I think coming across like you're a crazy rat who'd be like, hey, like I've got this crazy belief that this might surprise you. I think there should be no government, like something like that. That's I think that's not gonna help people lower their shields, right?
Right.
So I think that's probably a good reason to emphasize that a little less strongly.
And all the anarcho-capitalists said, that's not a strange view.
It's a strange view. It's also a wrong view, but no matter what you say, it's a strange view.
Let me be completely transparent with you,
Yeah.
the person I just met. I'm an anarchist. I believe in anarchy,
Right. So I think coming across that way and having someone get to that, like, okay, I'm bracing myself, who knows what's about to come out of this guy's mouth, is probably not a great thing. Although one could argue it's not that bad, because then you say this thing, it's like, okay, that's not that crazy. Okay, I'm relieved.
They're paying attention right now, probably.
That's a salesman tactic.
The other thing that I would say is there were multiple places where like I was doing kind of like the common groundy thing, and I think all of that came out awkward. And I promise you that was the studio. That is so much more natural in person.
Yeah. All right, I want to turn my mic off and just watch you guys do another one.
Do you want to switch roles?
No.
No.
I want to play with another.
Another side of your personality?
Yeah.
Is your intention that I'm just going to be the one on the hot seat the whole day?
Do you want to? Well, yeah, sure. About that. Do you want to do a part 2 to that, or do you want to switch different person?
I'm inclined to say just kind of keep going, and like if you want to step up the difficulty a little bit, the person had an epiphany and it's bodily rights or something, like that's okay. I'm not inclined to go through the kind of like lame, hey, how's it going? What do you think about abortion? Kind of stage again. But
I have a way to skip through that more for you if you want to talk bodily rights, but I'd like to be a little bit stronger of a intellectual or something.
Okay, what do you want to do?
Okay. So setting the stage, you are at a polling table. I am a student coming up to you. Okay. You are not talking to someone right now. You are free to dialogue with me.
So you're by coming up to me, you mean you're like you're making a beeline to me?
Not in an aggressive beeline, but I am passing by. I see the table and I'm approaching you, which is actually really rare. People should know.
What? I'm sorry. What's rare?
It's rare for, I think, someone to be passing by and actively come up to us without us even inviting them in.
Yeah, most of the time we've got to make an active move there.
So for sake of clarity, why don't you make an active move?
Okay. Hey, would you like to sign our poll?
Sure. Yeah. I'm on the yes side because I am really convinced by some great arguments I've heard from that perspective. Particularly in my philosophy class, we read Thompson's violinist paper. I really liked that thought experiment, and I agree.
It's a really smart thought experiment.
Yeah. So you've heard of it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thompson's got it going on. I think
Thompson was stinking smart.
Yeah, I think it was really smart.
I'm not sure I should say
for her
was. I don't know if she's dead or not.
In that paper, I'm saying Thompson was great. She made a great argument for a woman's right to her own bodily autonomy, and I think that right is essential to this conversation.
I think that's really well said. I appreciate that you seem like you're coming into this conversation with you've really thought about this, and
yeah,
that's like a joy washing over me, because I've had so many conversations today with people who they're not sure what they think about it, and I'm happy to talk to them because all people matter, I think. But I'll bet we could have a really interesting back and forth, because I actually think that Thompson is totally wrong. I think she's smart, and that was a good paper. It was smart and interesting. And I think she's totally wrong. Would you be interested in going back and forth? Does that sound
yeah, sure. Yeah, I do want to talk to you because I actually, when I read this paper, I brought it up to my roommate who's pro-life, and I tried to explain the violinist as much as I could to them, and they didn't have a good response at all. I didn't feel like they listened that well or didn't understand it or something, and so I feel like it holds up really well.
I'm just curious. Could you do you remember the conversation? Do you remember what they said? Just curious.
Pretty much something along the lines of focusing on the fetus and its right to life was my main concern. That was all they had, and Thompson agrees. For sake of argument, in Thompson's papers, when I remember it, she concedes that the fetus has a right to life, but women can have abortions anyway. And I just felt like my roommate was not responding to that very well.
I think something from what you said, I completely agree with you. Okay. The whole point. I think the whole point of the violinist story, the violinist is not non-controversially or uncontroversially a human person, right?
Yeah.
And so, but still, she has the right to unplug. And so I'm completely with you. I think a lot of pro-life people don't understand what's going on here, and I don't want to be mean to them or something. I think there's an understandable kind of a cultural gap going on here, where for the pro-life person, they're really, really focused on the humanity of the unborn, which for a long time, a lot of people have tried to deny that. And I think those arguments aren't any good. I think it's understandable that they're that focused on that. But that if you're in a particular kind of culture and you're not listening well to the smartest arguments on the other side, that you wouldn't understand how the violinist argument really sidesteps that issue. I think you're totally right about that.
Okay, so tell me why you think the violinist doesn't hold up then.
I think the analogy doesn't work. The analogy is it's a good try in a lot of ways, but there's a couple major ways where it's a disanalogy and disanalogies in actually relevant ways. So you can't respond to an argument by analogy by just saying, well, there's one thing that's different, because then it wouldn't be an analogy, right?
Yeah.
So that's not what I'm saying, just to be clear. I'm saying there are critical areas where the violinist story gets pregnancy wrong. And please understand, I still think it was a really brilliant paper, because pregnancy is weird. There really isn't anything else that's like pregnancy. And so doing an analogy to pregnancy is hard. So I think it's a good try, but it gets some things wrong. I assume you'd be interested to know what I think is wrong.
Yeah, because in my class, and this was not this semester, this was a while back, so I don't really remember, but there were some counterexamples, the violinist is not the person's child or whatever, but I just didn't feel like they were that strong.
I think there's something to that objection. That's not really where I'm inclined to go.
Okay.
I think that's not the strongest response to the violinist. I think there's two in particular major problems with the violinist.
Okay.
The first is what in kind of like my community and culture, what we call the responsibility objection. In the case of the violinist, you are like functionally you're like kidnapped, and you end up in this situation where this needy person is hooked up to you completely against your will. And that's much more analogous to a case like rape than it is a standard case of pregnancy. My view is that if a person willingly engages in an act that they know might result in the creation of a needy child, then they owe that child some kind of compensation. And that might look different for the different parties, because the way reproduction works, for humans anyway, is asymmetrical. Men don't carry babies, right?
Yeah.
And that's like kind of not fair. And I'm sorry about that, right? But I can't do anything about that. And so given the fact that that's asymmetrical, that means that some of the requirements are going to be different. I think it's very, very appropriate for men to be like forced by law to pay child support, like completely appropriate. And if anything, the government should be harder on men who don't try to pay child support. Like we should try to get around that, because if they willingly engage in an act that they knew might result in the creation of a needy child, then they owe that child some kind of compensation.
Okay, but I really don't think that's the case for pregnancy. Okay, so let's back up a second. I'm against abortion if it's being used for birth control. But I think like if you were trying to avoid that pregnancy, that's different. I mean, you have to be using birth control the correct way and everything. People should have a responsibility to do that if they don't want to be pregnant. But sometimes things happen. And so like, I think in that case, you're more justified in having abortion.
I think I might agree with like some small part of the last part of your sentence. I'm not trying to be like patronizing or something. Like I think there's something kind of on the right track about that, but I think generally, I disagree with your point. I think if you're being like flagrantly careless and like you're like just like woohoo whatever, or being really callous about pregnancy, then I think the level of culpability is even higher or something. But I think given what sex is and how it works and how pregnancy works and how it starts, the fact that you're trying to make that likelihood less likely doesn't mean you're not still culpable if the less likely thing happens. So could I give you like a thought experiment to illustrate that?
Sure.
So this is a little weird, but just kind of go with me. Imagine there's a baby making machine. Like it looks like a vending machine and like it has like different buttons on it. And if you push these different buttons, then you get a very pleasurable experience, like sex-like experience, right? And so imagine a person, let's say a guy walks up to the baby making machine and he wants to have a pleasurable experience, but he really doesn't want to the result of if you push these buttons. I didn't explain this well. If you push these buttons, then one thing that might happen, doesn't always happen, but might happen, is then a baby comes out of a chute at the bottom, like a newborn baby.
So like he knows the risk or something.
He knows the risk.
Okay.
And let's suppose that there's different buttons that are analogous to different forms of birth control. So let's imagine for a minute. This is a Josh Brahm development, by the way. Imagine for a minute that there's a given button that correlates exactly to like using a condom. Like it minimizes the risk of pregnancy exactly identically. I don't know what the stats would be on that. And also like limits the pleasure that you would get from pushing the button exactly analogously. Like you don't want to get pregnant, so like let's use a condom, even though it's kind of annoying and whatever else. Let's play it safe. You push the button, baby still comes out of the chute. I think you still owe that child compensation, even though it was like you're trying to be more responsible and trying to limit that likelihood. What do you think?
I feel like the person who's chosen to push a button that's like a condom versus the other, like another button or something that is
like the unsafe sex.
Yeah, like unprotected sex. I feel like the unprotected sex person would have more of a responsibility to a baby that pops out, where there'd be less responsibility or something. You should have like another option or something with birth control.
I think that might be the case. I'm not sure exactly how all this plays out. I think in none of these cases are you allowed to dump the child in a river. No matter what form of birth control you used, you can't, or which button you pushed. How many, like you could like layer it. So like there's a button where it's like you've got 3 different forms of birth control going on at one time. And when 1 in a million happens and the baby comes out, you still can't dump the baby in the river. I'm not trying to be like
right. No,
you're cheating with the language.
Yeah, I feel like it's convincing. It's convincing that you shouldn't be able to dump the child in a river, no matter what button you pushed.
So let me stop you for a second.
Okay.
If you want, I could give you another argument for the other side on this, and then we could talk about that, because I think this point's really important, and I suspect what might be the case that later on you think of this other thing and then you change your mind again, and I won't.
Yeah. Well, right now I'm thinking about like the violinist, like using this new like counter to the responsibility thing.
Okay. Maybe we can get back to that.
I mean, I kind of want to hear what you have to say, but I feel like I'm almost there or something.
Okay. So what help me understand what would be helpful at this point for you. So it sounds like you are, you're somewhat persuaded on the responsibility objection, or the legitimacy of that. At least to the point of saying that, you can't kill the child. Maybe you have less culpability or something, but that you can't kill it. But I'm not quite sure.
Okay, so there are several things going on for me. Like on one hand, I think, for example, a young person who's engaging in sex for the first time doesn't really know a whole lot about risk of pregnancy. I think it might be a little bit different. And also, like, if a woman isn't engaging in sex consensually, if it's a rape situation, it seems obvious to me that that's different.
I think that is very different. I think you're right. My view is that the responsibility objection is basically not useful at all in a case of rape. Mm-hmm. And my view, just like, for full disclosure, I think that abortion in the case of rape should not be legal. So I think that's not the only issue with the violinist. I think the other major issue, as I said, there were a couple major ones. There's a few, but like the most significant one to me is actually that that abortion is not withdrawing support from someone.
Okay.
Abortion is killing someone, intentionally, directly killing someone. And I think if you change the violinist story to reflect what abortion, like to make it more like what abortion is, where you're like, in order to disconnect from the violinist, you have to dismember him in a way that's like remotely analogous to how surgical abortion is done. I think the intuitional support for Thompson's argument dies away.
So like let's put the rape thing aside for a second, because I don't think I agree with you about the withdrawing support being different than I don't know what you called it, intentional killing or something. Mm-hmm. I think they're the same.
Help me understand.
I think you have a right to withdraw bodily support, and the only way you can do that right now, as far as technology goes, is abortion, and the way that it's performed. And the way that abortion is performed, as far as I know, is like, or I would guess, safest way for that woman seeking the abortion. Like I think abortion should be safe, and even if it might be like a little weird or something, or nasty, or seem like intentional killing, I think that's the best we can do.
Like intentional killing?
It's the closest we can come to withdrawing support. Like, we want to help her maintain her bodily autonomy, body autonomy, without, I don't know. There's no other way besides like abortion. I don't think she should be self-inducing abortion or something.
I certainly don't want her to self-induce abortion.
Yeah.
I feel like that like hints at the question of like the issue of illegal abortions, and I want to keep that to the side if we can, because
Sure.
it's going to overcomplicate too much if we try to talk about every issue at one time. Certainly don't want there to be self-induced abortions or illegal abortions. I don't want anyone hurt in an abortion, legal or illegal. But I want to try to keep the conversation focused.
Okay.
I think we're in an awkward spot, and this was one of the weird things about pregnancy, where women like who are considering abortion want to not support the fetus that's inside their body, and that's understandable. But in just the situation as it is, because of our current limits in technology, there isn't a way for her to do that isn't doing something evil. It's evil to dismember children because they're in the way, and you don't have a better, safer way to get them away. Like if we had like the kind of technology, or we could like Star Trek beam the baby, the fetus, I guess for the sake of this conversation, because we could say baby, if you want to, Star Trek beam the fetus into an artificial womb environment that it could survive in, like that's fine. We don't have that. And so I think similarly to the fact that if we didn't have abortion technology at all, we wouldn't say that women should then have the right to drown their newborns because they don't want to be mothers. I'm assuming we would agree about that.
Right, but
in this case, the fact that we have this technology limitation doesn't mean that we should allow the evil thing to be done.
okay, I don't like that you're calling it evil. I don't think that withdrawing support is evil. And I'm not seeing it in the same way you are right now. I disagree. I think that abortion's withdrawing support.
Okay, so let's like pause for a second. So I think we're having like a language challenge. That's I feel like we should be able to resolve this. I think what I'm arguing is that if you are intentionally dismembering someone, then that's an evil thing. That's unjust killing. And so if I'm right about that, and I think the fact that we have technological limitations, and this is the only way for the woman to not be supporting this fetus that she doesn't want to support, that doesn't mean that we should then allow that to happen.
Okay, so you're saying dismembering someone, and I don't see that as being true in abortion, because most abortions happen first trimester, and I don't think that that's fair for you to call it dismemberment.
Okay, so I think this is really helpful. Now we're getting somewhere. I think we've got a factual disagreement at this point instead of like a moral premise disagreement. How do you think that abortion is done in the first trimester?
I guess I'm not sure.
So in some cases, there would be something like RE46, which is closer to like something like unplugging. We let's hold off on RE46 for a second, because again, too distracting to do everything at once.
Okay.
But like a common way of doing abortion in the third trimester is like a suction abortion, or like a DNC, a dilation and curettage, in which case the baby, the fetus, whatever, is dismembered through scraping the lining of the uterus. The end result of the abortion is a dismembered fetus. And so I think to say that it's not dismembering, I don't know how you can justify that given what abortion is. I think you could try to like adjust your position and like to try to like get around what I'm saying by saying you're only in support of abortions in the case of rape, and if they're done in RE46, there's still going to be a problem there. But like certainly, if your argument depends on not justifying dismemberment abortions, then you're stuck on DNC, because that's definitely dismemberment.
Oh. So yeah, like when I'm picturing abortion, I'm picturing a girl going to a clinic and like maybe like being put under anesthesia or something. And I guess I don't really know the specifics like you're describing. I don't think you're lying to me right now, but I don't want to just like take your word for it too.
I think that's totally fair. I happen to have a brochure in my pocket that has pictures of both fetal images that depict what life in the womb looks like not bloody killing stuff. And I also have images that show what fetuses look like after abortion. And would you be open to looking at those pictures?
Yeah.
Here's the pictures.
Okay, so these look like earlier abortions. Because it's really tiny or something.
You could compare them to the fetal images on this page.
Okay.
So these pictures are first trimester. This other picture is 20 week, which is certainly not most abortions.
So these ones here that are like saying like 8-10 week abortions, that's the one you just described?
Yes.
It looks like dismemberment. This is not what I was picturing.
I think that's fair. You seem like you're unusually like open-minded, like to acknowledge that. Like that's a.
Well, I'm just being honest. Like
thing.
I wasn't picturing that in my head. I don't know what I was thinking it was. It just seems like, I wish there was a way to withdraw support without this.
I think the way that I used to think about it was something like, the baby is vaporized. I think that's kind of like what my picture of abortion was before I learned what abortion was. Like somehow or other, she becomes not pregnant anymore. Mm-hmm. And the problem is like there's already a life in there, a human life, that has to go somewhere. Like we can't just like vaporize it. It has to be removed. And like pregnancy being what it is, I think this is another problem with defending abortion and defending the violinist, is like the way a woman's body is interacting with the fetus is like it's in a very supportive way. Abortion is an unnatural act that like requires like dilation that the body is not trying to do. The body is wanting to protect the fetus. And so in order to get to it, you have to like go to pretty significant means. You have to get it out, and you got to get it out in a way that's not going to be like as harmful to the mother would be what the abortionist would want. And so that requires removing it piece by piece. Like that's kind of like the logistics that we're kind of stuck with until we have Star Trek beaming technology, which would be really nice.
So what about the rape thing?
So my view is that even in the case of rape, if the only issue is about dismemberment, I think that's sufficient to defeat the violinist. There is a consistent problem with every bodily rights argument I've literally ever heard, and I think I've heard them all. I mean, I'm sure there's new ones every day probably, but every one that I've ever heard has had a couple of things in common when they're making like comparisons to like things that are not pregnancy. So I'll tell you what those things are in a second. I'll give you another example though, because I'm thinking about it. Is like blood donation. I actually think this is a more compelling argument than Thompson's violinist. Even I consider this to be like one step above Thompson's violinist, which is to say that it doesn't cost that much to donate blood, right? Like I've donated blood a couple times. Have you ever donated blood?
No.
It's not a big deal. And in fact, I think it's such a not big deal that while it shouldn't be like governmentally demanded that people donate blood, it's a really good, virtuous thing to do because it costs you so little and it is so helpful. And so I donated blood a couple times when it was like really convenient. Like the people came to my university. I used to like walk into the health clinic and it was like, it's no big deal. Now I would have to look up stuff and like figure out how to do it. And I'm not going to that trouble because I'm inconsistent. Right. But we should do that. But also certainly the government shouldn't like grab you and take your blood. Right. Like right. We would agree about that. Right.
Yeah.
Like that's creepy and weird. And it's interesting because of how little it hurts you to take away a little bit of blood. I mean, obviously it would hurt you a lot if like they drained a lot of blood, but a little bit of blood, like your body can handle that. And pregnancy, I do think is more costly on the average pregnancy, probably any pregnancy, than just donating blood. And so like, why would you demand that women go through pregnancy, but not demand that people donate blood? Because in both cases, you could save a life. I think that's like really compelling. And it has the exact same problem as every other bodily rights argument. Yeah. Abortion is not refusing treatment. Abortion is killing. In every one of these bodily rights arguments, there's the disanalogy that's happening here is you're suggesting that all you're doing is you're choosing to not save someone. And that's not what abortion is. Abortion is not just not saving someone. Another like disanalogy that's at least very, very common, is certainly common in both of these cases, is that the person who needs saving is sick. This is an unhealthy person who has some kind of a disease that you have the ability to cure through the use of your body, whether that's through the violinist or through blood donation or whatnot. They have there's something wrong with them, and they need your body to help them. And with the unborn, there's nothing wrong with it. Like how different is the scenario in the violinist? If there's a way to do it where you make the violinist where it's like, despite like, forget all of the other myriad of disanalogies, just these two, the fact that it's not just not killing it, you are actively destroying him, and that there's nothing wrong with him. Like in order to make these analogies work, you've got to make him have a disease. But the fetus doesn't have a disease. It's in a natural, healthy environment. And there's nothing wrong with it. And you're taking it out of that natural, healthy environment and you're chopping it up and killing it. Like, so the analogy doesn't work for that reason.
Wow. Okay. I've never heard a response to the violinist like this. And you give me a lot to think about. And I want to think about it, but I have to go to class.
I think that's really fair. Do you have like another 30 seconds for me?
Yeah.
So I think that's really fair, and I think it would be unreasonable. And like I like really applaud you for being like willing to like you seem like you're truth oriented. You're really trying to go where truth leads, and not just like fighting for the sake of fighting.
I'm interested in it. I'm interested in this topic in general.
That's like really, really commendable. So here's my admonition to you, or something. I don't know if that's the right word. My recommendation or something. It's reasonable to not change your mind on something like this on the spot in one conversation. If you gave me a brilliant argument that I hadn't heard before, couldn't respond to, I don't think I would change my view on the spot right now. But I would take it really seriously. I think you are culpable to take it seriously. Like you can't just do the cop-out thing. We're like, I'll think about it later. And then you forget about it. Like, hey, I'm pro-choice. Like you're a bad person if you do that, right? You're a bad person. So you don't have to change your mind right now, but you do have to think about this. And if you can't find a good response, then I think you are morally obligated to change your stance.
Wow. Okay.
Is that fair?
Yeah, I guess.
All right. I would be happy to talk with you again. I'll be here until 3:00 or whatever.
Okay.
Awesome. Good job.
Thank you.
I hope you don't actually, in your real conversations, break to say, this is a Josh Brahm.
No, that's just for the sake of the podcast listeners.
Kind of figured. I want to get Rachel's reactions. I have one like very, very nitpicky kind of a question or potential pushback, but it's tiny.
Sure.
And then I think there's like kind of a little subtopic we could do, but it kind of relates to something that was at the end there. So both of those things I don't think should be the next thing that happens now. So
you want my reaction?
yeah, I think I want to hear kind of what your guys' thoughts. I'm interested in any commentary that you have, Tim, about what you did, but let's start with Rachel.
So I do want to say I have several times during outreach encountered people who have heard of the violinist paper before and brought them up. I not as directly as I did right off the bat, but it comes up. This is something that's real. I'm in a philosophy class right now, philosophy of bioethics, and we studied the paper, and I talked a lot with students in my class during our discussion section about this, and so that influenced some of the things I said. So I was trying to be as realistic as possible because it was concerns that were brought up during that discussion.
I think it came out really real.
Yeah,
I thought it was really good.
Okay, and yeah, I mean, I think that my only thing was, I noticed Tim did most of the talking. On one hand, that was appropriate because pro-choice Rachel was interested in hearing what he had to say, and that was at the beginning of the conversation. I think you said, would you like to hear like my response why I think the violence doesn't hold up or something. So that was appropriate. On the other hand, it did feel imbalanced a little bit to me, but it also could just be the awkwardness of the recording.
That plays different in person. So I think I'm like trying to process like why this is so different. I think this is the biggest difference between what we're experiencing here and what I do on campus. I think a lot of that has to do with visual cues.
Sure.
So when someone has something they want to say, then I shut up and I like make room for them. And you're not giving me visual cues to shut up. You're just like
You're listening.
You're listening, and I'm continuing. I'm trying to be really clear.
Because I'm very much ERI oriented towards the importance of listening and to understand. And
Yes.
so I don't think the average person has the same sort of intentional communication skill development that I do. And it's not something I can stop.
Yeah. So I think a more realistic version would be one where you're jumping in more.
Yeah.
And I'm having a harder time getting complete thoughts out.
Yeah.
And I'm having to work really hard to maintain my train of thought. This is where I need to go. Right. And getting there eventually.
Sure.
Because I think like basically everything that I said was necessary for like communicating to you. But realistically speaking, in a real conversation, that's a lot harder to pull off.
I think our listeners should acknowledge that
Yes.
part of it was the most unrealistic.
Yes.
I think there's also, so I agree with everything that was just said. So like that's part of what's going on. But I'll just also like note, like, we know there is a difference. Well, there are lots of differences, but there's a key difference in kind of, at least Tim and my style. I think to some extent in Jacob's too. But certainly our style of dialogue is just different than some of our colleagues in pro-life apologetics. And one of those differences that we've just acknowledged is that the ratio of how much like talking and explaining our view is, like compared to like maybe questions being used, which will cause usually the other person to do like more talking, is just different. And like the kind of the ERI style is you're gonna do more talking than you would if you only learn from a different pro-life apologist, because we're not using questions in the same way to make arguments, and we're doing a lot more kind of just like putting the cards on the table, and there's sort of this like
Trying to be really transparent.
when we're talking about that content, the material in the course, about putting the cards on the table, like we just kind of noted, like, this means, like, as soon as we make this change from the way we used to do it to this way of, like, even in the way that we taught at the toddler, like the describe the logic step, as soon as you do this, like, I don't want to say dramatically, because I feel like that's like overstating it, but like it makes a big difference in how much talking you're doing. Like, that means that now I'm going to do like a paragraph at this point and explain for this person what my cards are, which is different than like when I listen to, again, like other people who've taught pro-life apologetics, and we have total respect for them and a lot of really, really good stuff there. But there's a different style there. So some of this, like, if you just listen to the audio and if someone like timed out, all right, it's like 80% Tim, 20% Rachel. Some of that is, there's awkwardness to the recording thing, and Rachel's giving like no visual cues, and she's a super good listener and all this stuff. Part of it is also our style is just different. Yeah. And some of that is true to outreach.
Some of it is actually good. It's a good thing to be really clear. At least
that's our view.
Yeah.
Some of the things I was asking about, or the topic that came up, it's so important to be clear and to emphasize different points. Yeah. So I thought it was appropriate for you to do so. It's
easier to raise a hard question than to give an answer.
Yeah.
That's some of what's going on.
Yeah. I want to emphasize, I think one of the most, as far as like a teaching tool, one of the most important things that happened in that dialogue is the way that Tim brought in kind of the intentional killing kind of like response to the bodily rights thing. Like we emphasize that a lot in the role play that we wrote for Rebecca and I for the conference of kind of this idea, like here's is actually the main disanalogy with the violence thing. It's not the responsibility objection. It's the way that bodily rights arguments treat abortion as if it's just withholding treatment versus actively killing. Like, this is so much of how we ought to be responding in general, like to like even
very
like things
direct.
like the corpse meme of, you want to, pro-lifers want to give corpses more bodily rights than they want to give women, and things like it all ends up coming back to this a lot of times. And so like I would recommend, if you haven't thought a lot about that distinction, like, listen to that part of the audio a couple of times and get to where you can actually like do that on campus. That has to be a tool in your toolbox for you to be an effective pro-life person at outreach at this point. Abortion is not just not helping someone. Right. Abortion is killing someone. I have one little nitpicky thing, but I might be being like overly sensitive to this thing. I didn't do that perfectly. It's all right. Okay. Use the word you a lot of times in very certain ways when you're kind of describing like what's going on for like the pro-choice perspective, or what's going on in abortion, but in ways I thought like it might not be the most helpful thing. So
Sure.
I only wrote down like one sentence, but it's like you're describing abortion, but you said like you're chopping it up and killing it.
Yeah.
And there's wonder if that like it like I think what you mean
It's
is
not
like
intentional.
someone else. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in the way that the rapport was working in the conversation, I didn't interpret that as you
Right.
at all.
Sure.
But at a subconscious level, it could not be. It could be more clear.
It's a mistake.
Yeah.
At least distracting or something
Sure.
like that. Okay, so you might say, let's not even talk about this right now because it's too much of a topic, but there's something that you modeled at the end there that we haven't talked about publicly very much, which is kind of you were very intentional about like, it was like, can I have one more minute? And you did a thing there that we talked a lot about on our way to the outreach the other day. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that concept?
Sure. So I'll probably write something about this later on, but it's something that I've become very, very passionate about. And I think part of the I've been thinking more about it since Rachel and I talked at the conference a few weeks ago, because Rachel said that like she doesn't do the kind of the closing move, or at least she didn't as much. That's what she's working on. I think it's really, really important that you don't get into the mode of being so nice that you don't cash in your rapport.
Yeah.
I think that rapport is a resource and you have to spend it. I think there's a problem on both ends of the spectrum here. On one end, you shouldn't be spending rapport you don't have, then you're going into debt. Like you shouldn't start off a conversation by being like pushing really hard. Like you need to take this really seriously.
Right.
If you see that in the first 2 minutes,
Nope.
you're dead. Because you don't have the kind of rapport to sustain that kind of a push.
Yeah.
But if you don't use that rapport, you build up all this rapport, you find all this common ground, and you're so nice, good for you. And he's like, okay, goodbye. And you don't spend that. That is such a waste of such a precious resource. Because your rapport with this person is worthless currency in every other context. It's nothing. It's like trying to spend British money in the United States. You can't spend it. Your rapport with this exact person is only good with that exact person. And so spend it, use it, especially if you're not expecting to see them again. Like if this is on your campus, you think you're gonna have another conversation with them, maybe hold off. Don't burn all your rapport. And I'm not saying like don't push like ridiculous.
Right.
But a certain level of like, I really want you to consider like this one thing, like really take this seriously, and like don't be lame. Like this is serious. This is important. You can't do that if you have no rapport, but if you have it, spend it. Otherwise it's just a waste.
Another thing is Tim pushed me really hard at the end. He said, like, I think you might even be like a bad or like you're a bad person.
But I did it in a joking
way. You could also say like you are more open-minded if you take this and think about it than if you let it go.
That's more of a positive
More
version.
of a positive. There are so many different ways to do it. And I think if you find your style and a way that you're really comfortable in doing it, it can be really helpful.
Yeah. Rapport is a resource. Spend it.
Do you mind if I talk about how we use this concept with the Mormons?
Sure.
So Tim and I've referenced this before in speeches, but we haven't talked a lot about what happened during most of the meetings. But Tim and I had a series of 15 meetings with Mormons in my living room. Where like technically Tim had 14 because I was the only one there for the first one because they showed up unannounced. But after that, Tim was there for every single one, and it was awesome. And you know, one of the guys was constant, was there every single time, and then he had like two kind of partner guys that were there for kind of half and half, and then sometimes there'd be the awkward third wheel come and it'd be kind of a whole different thing. But we were mainly focusing on these two guys, and so like Tim and I would brief before every meeting, kind of before they showed up. We'd have the meeting, and then we would do a debrief afterwards. And then sometimes in our briefings, we're trying to think about is there any, like, do we have kind of an agenda today? Like, for lack of a, more positive word or something like, is there something that we're hoping to try to accomplish specifically today? Or is there something like, do we just want to let them kind of take the reins? There's a time where we just pretty much let them completely take control of the meeting, because the meeting prior, I think meeting 8 or 9, we had pushed them really hard on the issue of abortion. Because LDS people, generally are super pro-life, and the LDS Church website is super, super pro-life. But there is this kind of rape exception thing that's said on the LDS Church website. It's a hard thing to grapple with if you're a pro-life LDS person, and we pushed really hard against that rape exception, and it was you could tell it like really emotionally like. It weighed on them. I mean, we showed them graphic images and everything. You know, we pushed really hard. We cashed in a lot of rapport, and then the next one we're like, we're gonna let them talk about whatever they want to talk about. You know, like whatever it is.
We're gonna build up some rapport.
Yeah, we're gonna spend some more time, build up some more rapport, and we did that. And most of the meetings would be kind of neutral. So there were only a couple of times where we kind of like went all in, but it gave us a chance to go all in one more time on that last meeting.
Yeah.
Because we knew, like we had said, because a lot of times, like these guys would get moved quickly, like you're moving to a different area within like a week or something like that. And we'd always told the main guy, like, please tell us, like we really care about you. We would want to be able to say goodbye. Please tell us if you're going to end up somewhere else. And he always promised he would. And then I got that text, hey, I'm moving up to like Modesto or something like that. I forget. We said, please, can we meet you this weekend? And like we had to kind of scramble. Like it wasn't even very convenient to meet with him one more time that quickly. But he did. He came over, and we were able to play an hour-long documentary that a friend of mine had forwarded me of, I think, probably the strongest argument against Mormonism. I'm not going to go into detail on what that is, at least not in this context. But it was an hour-long documentary.
It's a lot to ask.
And they had brought this like older guy, you know, with them who was, you know, had clearly some authority. And I'm just thinking, like, is he going to allow this to happen? Like, he'd never been there before. And they watched the entire thing. And we were really gracious about it. And, you know, we were very intentional about the way we set it up and kind of what we said afterwards. But we went all in. It was kind of like, we're going to basically give the hardest push that we can. And so whenever I think about kind of this concept of, okay, like, don't waste the rapport that you've built in at the end. Like I think of those guys, because we so could not have shown them that documentary on meeting 2 or something like that. Like there's no way. But you have 15 meetings. You can build a lot of rapport with someone.
Yeah.
I want to comment on one thing that
Sure.
Tim did. While Tim was preparing the thought experiment of the baby making machine, he kind of misspoke or messed up a little bit. And he said that to me. And this is evidence that Tim is playing himself. He knows the material. He's mastered the material. He's an expert in the he's helped develop it. And so I want to say that happens a lot. Even it doesn't mean that you're not a good apologist or something. It's okay to
acknowledge
say,
you made the boo-boo.
right. Like
Definitely.
acknowledging that, hey, I didn't explain that really clearly. Let me start over. Or are you tracking with me or did I lose you? Because I lost myself.
I love
great.
that.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
great.
Like that's okay. I think that it actually makes the other person feel more comfortable if they feel like they're not talking to someone who's like so advanced that they're like above them or something.
Yeah.
And it's okay. Roll with it. No conversation is perfect.
Yeah, it's a good place for both humor, which is good in and of itself, which again we're talking about in a future podcast. But it's also good because you're helping them to understand, like whatever the thing is that you missed or whatever. Like there's like it's almost
informal.
It almost makes me want to mess up on purpose so that I can do that because there's like a double good thing that comes. Anyway, yeah.
I think theoretically, if you were a good enough actor to pull it off, that wouldn't be that bad a thing. Except it's kind of dishonest.
There's
I
this
don't love.
that reminds me of a scene from the movie Hitch with Will Smith,
Which one?
where he the guy he's mentoring to
Whole
be like
opening sequence.
not the opening sequence, but when he's dating that really nice woman that Allegra Cole, she's like tears above him. He's like a good.
She's like an heiress.
He's like a 4. She's like a 9. I don't know. And like at the very end of the movie, she says something about, "Did you spill mustard on your shirt on purpose to make me feel more comfortable on our first date or whatever?" And he's like, "No."
Yeah, she's talking with Will Smith, who's the coach.
Oh,
She's
okay.
like, "Did you tell him to do these things or to like make me feel more comfortable in this way?" And he's like, "No, that was him being an idiot doing things. I was telling him, don't do that."
Nope. Be all suave. Don't stir the inhaler. Yeah.
So feel encouraged to make mistakes.
Yes.
It's going to be okay.
Totally agree.